My name is Dennis Calloway, and I was 64 years old the morning I called a cruise line to remove 14 people from a reservation I had paid for and added one. The credit card statement was open on the kitchen table at 4417 Thornwood Drive. The $38,247 charge printed in black ink next to the date March 11th. Ruth's photograph was on the shelf behind the table, the one from our last trip together, her laughing at something just outside the frame. I thought it was finished. 3 weeks later, I understood it had barely started. Welcome back to Dad's True Revenge, the quiet corner of the internet where accounts get settled. If you've ever given everything and got nothing back, this story is for you. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. I spent 36 years as a construction supervisor in Charlotte, North Carolina. I started as a laborer at 22, pouring footings on subdivision sites in the August heat, and I worked my way to site supervisor by 29. By the time I retired, 14 months before this story begins, I had overseen construction of 412 residential units, 11 commercial buildings, and 1 school. I showed up at 5:47 every morning for 3.5 decades. I knew how to read a foundation before the concrete set. I knew which problems looked small and weren't. Ruth and I bought the house at 4417 Thornwood Drive in 1988, the year Garrett was born. It was a 3-bedroom ranch on a corner lot in the Steel Creek neighborhood, with silver maple in the front yard that Ruth planted the spring we moved in. I put in the back deck myself in 1994. I re-roofed the house in 2003. I repainted every room in 2011 because Ruth said she wanted the walls to feel like morning. I did not know what that meant exactly, but I matched the paint chips she handed me, and I did it on 4 consecutive Saturdays in March. Ruth died on a Tuesday in September 2020 at 6:14 in the morning from a stroke that arrived without warning. She was 61 years old. I covered the funeral expenses alone, $19,400, because Garrett said the timing was difficult. He had a cash flow issue with the business, and he would make it right. I told him not to worry about it. I meant it. I did not keep track of such things. Garrett was our only child. I paid for 4 years at UNC Charlotte, $54,000 between 2003 and 2007. In 2008, when the recession hit in the contracting firm where he had just started laid off half its staff, I drove him to 6 job interviews over 3 months, waited in the car each time, and did not mention it afterward. I co-signed a mortgage on the house he and Saundra bought in 2009 on Palisades Park Drive because their debt-to-income ratio came back short by 4 points. I kept Garrett on my health insurance through his employer plan until he was 31, paying the additional premium myself. When his own small contracting business had a slow year in 2017, I lent him $22,000 on a Tuesday afternoon. Transferred directly, no paperwork. He paid back $8,000 of it. I did not bring up the rest. Saundra was a woman who organized things. She organized the family Christmas gatherings, the summer cookouts, the seating arrangements at dinners. She organized. I came to understand the distance between people. She was not unkind in any single sentence. She was the kind of unkind that requires a pattern to see. The cruise had been my idea. After I retired, I wanted to do something I had never done. Take the family somewhere. Not a weekend, not a backyard gathering. Something that required passports. I researched for 6 weeks. I settled on a 10-day Eastern Caribbean itinerary, departing April 24th from Port Canaveral aboard the Coastal Voyages Meridian. I called Garrett on February 7th at 7:22 p.m. and told him I wanted to book it for the family. Him, Saundra, their 2 kids, Saundra's parents, her sister and brother-in-law, and their 3 children, 14 people. I told him I would cover the full cost. He said that sounded incredible. On February 14th, I called Coastal Voyages and booked the full reservation. 14 guests for interconnected staterooms, the dining package, the shore excursion bundle. Total charge, $38,247. I gave them my credit card number and signed the authorization form. They mailed to 4417 Thornwood Drive. I filed it in the desk drawer in the 2nd bedroom, the room that had been Ruth's home office, the one with the view of the silver maple. The charge cleared on March 11th at 8:31 a.m. I saw it on the statement and felt something in my chest that was not exactly pride, but was adjacent to it. I thought about Ruth, about what she would have said. She would have said it was too much. I would have told her it was exactly right. My throat tightened at that thought, the familiar shape of a conversation that could no longer happen, and I let it pass. The call from Garrett came on April 3rd at 11:03 a.m. on a Thursday. I was in the backyard when the phone rang, pulling the first weeds of the season from the bed along the fence line. I answered on the second ring. Garrett's voice was measured, careful, the way it was when he had rehearsed. "Dad," he said, "I want to talk to you about the cruise." I said I was listening. "The thing is," he said, "Saunders' parents are coming and her sister, and it's just a dynamic thing. You know how it can be when the group doesn't quite balance. Saunders' family is coming, and it just gets complicated when the dynamic isn't balanced. You understand?" I said nothing. I stood in the yard with the phone at my ear and the weeds in my left hand, and I let the sentence complete itself in the air. My stomach dropped, slowly and completely, the way it does when something you built reveals a flaw in the foundation. I had been a construction supervisor for 36 years. I knew that sound. "We think it would be better for everyone," Garrett continued, "if you maybe sat this one out. You could use the time at home. It might actually be. It would probably be more relaxing for you anyway." I said nothing. He kept talking. He mentioned that Saunders' family had a certain way of doing things on vacation. He said the kids were at an age where the group energy mattered. He said he thought about it a lot before calling. He said, "Dad, we just want to be relaxed and clean, you know." Something in my chest went cold. Not anger. Something below anger. Something older and more structural. I had poured 36 years of early mornings, and overtime and lent money and signed mortgage papers and driven to job interviews and kept my mouth closed when it would have been easier to speak. I had rebuilt his deck in 2019 over 3 consecutive weekends in October heat because he said he couldn't afford the contractor quote. I had sent $600 every month for the first 2 years of his marriage because Saunders was finishing her degree and the income gap was real. I had done all of that not because I kept a ledger, but because that was what a father did. And now my son was calling at 11:03 a.m. on an April Thursday to tell me to stay home from a vacation I had purchased. My face went still. "I understand," I said. I did not mean it. I went inside and set my phone on the kitchen counter at 11:19 a.m. I washed my hands at the sink. I looked out the kitchen window at the silver maple, which was leafing out in particular yellow-green of early April, the color that only lasts 2 weeks before it darkens. Ruth had loved that 2-week window. She called it the year's first honest color. My eyes stung. I kept my face neutral. I stood at that sink for 4 minutes. I thought about 36 years of knowing which problems looked small and weren't. I thought about the credit card authorization form in the desk drawer in Ruth's old office. I thought about $38,247 and 14 people and a 10-day itinerary that left Port Canaveral on April 24th. I dried my hands. I went to the desk drawer and I took out the signed authorization form. 2 pages, my signature on the second page, the booking number printed across the top in bold. I set it on the kitchen table next to the statement. I picked up the phone. At 7:14 a.m. the following morning, April 4th, a Friday, I called Coastal Voyages and asked to speak with guest services. The representative who answered was Marilyn Oates, guest services manager. I gave her my booking number. I told her I needed to make a modification to the reservation. She confirmed the booking. I told her I would be removing 13 of the 14 guests from the primary reservation and rebooking them on a secondary reservation in a different name, Garrett Calloway, with a $0 balance transfer, meaning the original payment authorization would remain on my account, but the secondary reservation would carry no financial obligation. Then I told her what I wanted to do with my own reservation. Marilyn Oates was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I can absolutely process that, sir." She walked me through the modification in 31 minutes. At 7:46 a.m., the secondary reservation under Garrett Calloway was confirmed. At 7:47 a.m., my own reservation was modified. She emailed the updated booking documents to my address at 7:52 a.m. I printed them at the desk in Ruth's old office and put them in a manila envelope. I filed it in the drawer where the original authorization form had been. Then I called Victor Shea. Victor was my estate attorney, Shea and Pratt, on South Tryon Street, a precise, unhurried man who had handled my estate planning since 2014. I reached him at 9:31 a.m. and asked for an appointment before the end of the following week. He said he had a block on the afternoon of April 23rd. I said that would work. A man who builds things understands one truth above all others. The foundation decides everything else. I had built something in Charlotte over 36 years. I had poured in overtime hours and early mornings and kept quiet conversations. What I had not done, until that April morning, was look carefully at what I had built it for. On April 23rd, I drove to Victor Shea's office on South Tryon Street and sat across from him at the conference table at 2:17 p.m. We reviewed the estate in full. The house at 4417 Thornwood, the retirement accounts, the investment instruments for separate beneficiary designations. Victor did not ask unnecessary questions. He was the kind of attorney who understood that the documents were the conversation. At 4:44 p.m. on April 23rd, Victor Shea filed a beneficiary designation amendment with the relevant financial institutions. He also prepared a letter of instruction regarding 4417 Thornwood Drive, notarized at 5:02 p.m. and witnessed by his paralegal. I drove home. I ate dinner. I looked at Ruth's photograph on the shelf for a long time. Departure day was April 24th. I was on the road by 5:38 a.m. Port Canaveral. It was a 4-hour drive from Charlotte. I arrived at the terminal at 9:44 a.m. and parked in the long-stay lot. I took the shuttle to the terminal building. I walked through the glass doors at 8:52 a.m. and stood in the check-in line with my single carry-on bag and my boarding documents in a manila envelope. Garrett and Sandra arrived at 9:12 a.m. with the children. Sandra's parents, her sister, her brother-in-law, 14 people. Moving to the terminal, in particular loose formation of a group that believes itself to be the largest thing in any room. Garrett was carrying a coffee. Sandra was organizing the children toward the right check-in lane. Garrett saw me at 9:17 a.m. His expression shifted, a slight compression around the jaw, the look of a man who has planned for something and found that his plan has a gap. He said nothing immediately. He walked toward me. "Dad," he said, What are you doing here?" "I'm boarding," I said. We talked about this." "We did," I said. Something behind my sternum went very still. My hands were flat at my sides. Sandra had come up beside Garrett. She looked at me and then at Garrett, and then at the boarding documents in my hand. Her expression was the organized kind, composed, already calculating. "I think there's been a confusion," she said. I said nothing. I handed the check-in agent my boarding documents at 9:22 a.m. Thomas Crane, the First Carolina Trust Bank officer who had processed a separate matter that same morning at 9:17 a.m., had already confirmed by text that the account access modification I had requested the prior afternoon was in effect. The check-in agent reviewed my documents, confirmed my stateroom, and handed me my boarding pass. She thanked me for sailing with Coastal Voyages. I stepped aside and waited. Garrett and Sandra checked in next. The agent reviewed their reservation. The secondary booking, under Garrett Calloway, $0 balance. For staterooms confirmed. Everything was in order. They had what I had paid for. They boarded. I boarded at 10:19 a.m. For the first 2 days, I did not seek them out, and they did not seek me. The ship was large enough for that. I ate at the aft dining room at 7:15 each morning. I sat on my balcony in the afternoon. I read the 2 books I had packed. On the evening of the second day, April 26th, there was a family gathering at the pool deck that Sandra had organized. I could see it from 2 decks up. The group arranged around a table, Garrett standing with a drink, making a toast. I could not hear the words. I watched for 3 minutes and then went inside. On the afternoon of the third day, April 27th, Garrett came to my stateroom at 3:31 p.m. He knocked twice. I opened the door. He came in and stood in the middle of the small room and looked at the window, not at me, He said he wanted to understand what was happening. He said this in the careful register of a man who has been told by someone off camera to have this conversation. I went to the small desk in the corner, and I picked up the manila envelope. I removed 2 documents. The first was the original cruise booking confirmation. 2 pages, my signature on the authorization form, the $38,247 charge, the booking date of February 14th, and all 14 names on the original reservation, including my own. The second was his state amendment, Victor Shea's letterhead. The filing timestamp of 4:44 p.m., April 23rd. The specific language of the beneficiary redesignation, and the letter of instruction regarding Thornwood Drive. I set them both on the desk between us. Something in me went quiet. I paid for this trip, I said. I paid for it because I wanted to do something for the family. That is the only reason I had a credit card on file with this cruise line. He looked at the documents. This state amendment is self-explanatory, I said. Victor will contact you in writing after we dock. There's nothing to discuss on the ship. His face went very still. Not the pale of surprise, the still of recognition. He was an adult who had spent years around contracts. He knew what a filed amendment meant. Dad, he said. Enjoy the cruise, Garrett, I said. I kept my voice level. I picked up my book from the bed. I did not look at him again until he had left the room, and the door had closed behind him. The ship docked at Nassau at 7:08 a.m. on April 28th. I took the short excursion I had booked, a 2-hour historical walking toward the old town, by myself at my own pace. The guide's name was a man who knew every building on every street and told the story of each one without hurrying. I thought about Ruth, who would have asked every question twice. My chest ached in the clean way it did at the cemetery on the 3rd Sunday of every month. I let it. We docked back in Port Canaveral on May 4th at 6:47 a.m. I drove home to Charlotte and arrived at 4417 Thornwood Drive at 11:22 a.m. I parked in the driveway. The silver maple was fully leafed out now. The green deepened into summer. The 2-week honest color was gone for another year. Victor Shea's formal notice went by certified mail to Garrett's address on May 2nd, while we were still at sea. Garrett signed the delivery confirmation on May 6th. He called that evening at 7:39 p.m. I let it ring. He called again on May 9th. I answered on May 14th at 4:12 p.m., and I told him I was willing to have one conversation in Victor's office with Victor present when Garrett was ready. He said he understood. He called Victor's office on May 21st to schedule. Dennis Calloway, 64 years old, and still at 4417 Thornwood Drive, where the silver maple is green now all the way to the top, and the back deck I built in 1994 still holds without a single loose board. Some fathers of the foundation. Some children forget what they're standing on, and some buildings only reveal their structure when someone finally reads a blueprint. When your own family tells you that you're not welcome at something you paid for, what do you do first? Leave quietly or make sure they understand exactly what's changing? If this story reached something in you, hit that like button and subscribe for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of this sphere.